Well, hello everyone and welcome to Conversations with the Dean. I'm Turney Stevens. I'm the Dean of the College of Business here at Lipscomb University, and we're honored today to welcome Sarah Meyerrose to our studio. Sarah, welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here.
Well, we're honored to have you. You've got so many qualifications here, I'm not even sure where to start. You're officially here today as the president of ION, which is the Inter-Organization Network. We'll get to that in just a minute.
Okay.
But as I'm looking at your qualifications, you run your own consulting firm, SMSS. You're a former very senior officer at First Horizon Corporation in Memphis, which most of us as Nashvillians know better as First Tennessee
Absolutely.
Bank, the parent company.
Mm-hmm.
My goodness, you're a graduate of the Owen Graduate School of Management. We share that qualification, but you were the valedictorian. I'm afraid I can't share that qualification.
Well, I was the valedictorian speaker.
Oh, I see.
So I was in the top 5 of the class, but I didn't actually hit the top of it.
Well,
so.
I'm afraid I can't claim to be in the top 5, so congratulations on that.
It was pure luck.
Let's talk about ION, I-O-N, the Inter-Organization Network. Tell us what that national organization is all about.
It is an organization of organizations, all that have the same, at least as part of their mission, to advance women to the boardroom. So we have 16 member organizations that range all the way from New York to California and points in between, representing well over 1,000 companies that we survey every year. And what ION is there for is an advocacy organization to find ways to pull all the people that are interested in seeing more gender diversity, thought diversity on corporate boards, finding ways to partner with some of the other national organizations, finding ways to talk to companies and really to be helpful and to also identify candidates for companies. We're not a search firm, but we can certainly get the word out and help companies find some good candidates.
Now, you've been a public board member. You've served a public company at the highest levels. Why is board diversity important? Why would gender diversity be important if I were a shareholder of a public company?
There have been a lot of studies, for one thing. There's a great business case that says that more diversity on the board gives you better business results, it gives you better ethics generally, it has better governance if you have different thoughts on the board. And the reason for that is it's not so much just the gender diversity. That happens to be the focus that we have, obviously. But the difference is that you bring people into the conversation who have a different outlook on what's going on. So many boards, as you well know, require sitting CEOs to be on their board. Well, many times sitting CEOs have their way of doing things and they talk to each other a lot and they don't tend to challenge each other as somebody who might come in with a different perspective does. The other thing that I think is very important is that you've got in the Fortune 500, only 16% or so of the board members are women. If you go down into more public companies, the Russell 3000, for example, 11.6. And think of all those companies that are doing business with primarily women or more than 50% women, and those perspectives, those different ways of thinking about things, those concerns that they might have never make it to the board level.
We've been in a period in this country really since 2008 of great financial turmoil. In fact,
Right.
We're still in that period of time. And so the discussion about how to do things better, especially with large companies and public companies, is probably a very timely discussion. Would board diversity improve the fluctuations that we've seen perhaps in the economic conditions of the large companies of this country?
I think it very well could have. There's the funny story. People said, well, if it had been Lehman Sisters, would it have failed? And the answer is probably not, but it probably wouldn't have been successful either, because studies have shown that in general, don't want to make broad statements like this, but generally women are less risk prone and the guys are more inclined to take more risks. Mm-hmm. And so if you had the Lehman siblings, it probably would have been a very successful company. Mm-hmm. So I think balancing that risk averse versus not on the board, and again, I'm not trying to make any stereotypes, but that's what studies show. The other thing is, again, women tend to be very thoughtful. do their homework, not saying that the men don't, but very thoughtful, do their homework, and will ask the hard questions at the board. And sometimes I think it's very difficult for a board of directors or a management team, for that matter, when they've worked together very closely, to see what's really happening in the broader sense, because they're so committed to their strategy. So bringing a new perspective in could help.
Now, in Europe, there's been a mandated minimum percentage in many of the countries of Europe,
right,
in terms of the amount of female or racial diversity required on the board. Should we have a mandated percentage in this country?
I would not like to see that. And the reason I wouldn't is because whenever there is a mandated percentage, then there can always be the excuse that, well, we had to put these people on the board and they're not really very good. You see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So you can blame, if something goes awry with a choice, you can blame the rules instead of taking responsibility for it. And it also maybe doesn't have as much commitment from the rest of the board members to diversity if they feel like they've been pressured to do something. So what ION really likes to do is to build out this business case to help companies understand how much better their outcomes could possibly be if they had better diversity on the board, diversity in all aspects. And so I would much rather see us continue to raise this conversation of why this is a good thing. And ION has also turned its attention to some extent to the executive suite, because obviously that's where your board members
Sure.
are going to come from in most cases. And the executive suites of public companies are not very diverse either, as you well know. So if we can find the hidden barriers, and there have been some great studies recently that said, you go into companies and survey lots of them, and here's why women aren't reaching the executive levels of a company, or they're reaching them in very small amounts. And it's not the same reasons that were always easily put out there by a lot of us, including myself, I'm sure, at some point. You know, women didn't want to, they didn't want the pressure of it. They were going to have their families. They took themselves out for whatever reason. And we're finding that those are not the real reasons that they're not reaching those executive suites.
Sarah, I'm a member of a public board in
Mm-hmm.
New York, and after I was appointed to this board in New York, I took it upon myself to go through the UCLA Directors College at my
Mm-hmm.
own expense, which was about a week-long program, and certified me as a public company director. But I found in that program that there were lots of areas of expertise that I just simply would not have mastered or known about had I not gone through that program. There is no minimum qualification for service on a public board.
Right.
I wonder, should there be, should public board members be required to be licensed, just in terms of basic fundamental knowledge about governance and accounting and strategy and the various things they're asked to act upon on behalf of the shareholders?
Mm-hmm. I think that there's a lot of merit in really looking closely at that, because as you said, it's become so much more complex. The whole world has become more complex. The accounting rules, the regulations have become so very complex, and really, frankly, the liability for corporate directors. Mm-hmm. So it would be to the benefit both of the directors and to the companies and to their shareholders to have a group of people that are more prepared, more formally prepared for board service.
Now, I also chair the Nominating and Governance Committee for this particular public company, and one of the things that I've encouraged our board to do is to hire an outside group to do a board evaluation of our performance mm-hmm. as a board. Here again, that's not mandated or required. Should it be?
I don't know about mandated or required, but certainly in the annals of best practices. Because again, when you work together, it's hard to see each other's weaknesses or places where you could utilize somebody better. So I think it might be a really good idea to do that, and the good boards probably do, mm-hmm. As you guys are.
Let me take our discussion down to the Tennessee level. You're okay. Here as president of ION, which is a national organization, but
right.
I believe Cable, the women of the executive women's group here in Nashville, is a part of the ION network, and we've partnered here at Lipscomb for several years to do a study of female membership of public boards. Dr. Laura Williams heads that study, and we're very proud of that. Do you have any observations to make about Tennessee versus the nation as a whole?
In the last report that we did, which was published last December or this January, I suppose, Tennessee ranked dead last in the number of women on corporate boards in the surveys that we did. And again, those take into account all the public companies in our footprint. We did another thing last year, ION overall did, and it included, of course, the local ones, and that was to look at how many board seats came open and how many women were elected to those open board seats. Tennessee didn't, the percentage wasn't bad because we elected, of the new independent board members, 17% of those were women. But that was 3 out of 17, so it really wasn't much to move the needle, as you can tell. So Tennessee has a ways to go. It's not unlike a lot of other states. There are actually, when you look at the Russell 3000 survey that GMI, Government Metrics International, did, they showed it by region, and Tennessee shows up in what's called the South region there, of course. And the South is kind of in the middle, but the Midwest is at the top. But the mountain states and the western states are actually much worse even than the South. A lot of that has to do, it appears, with industry. Consumer products, consumer durables, those tend to have more women on their boards. Utilities are way at the bottom. Kind of the classic ones that you would think of are the ones that still tend to be more male-dominated. Now, Tennessee has an awful lot of opportunity to do more because of the big healthcare industry that we have here. We have 65 publicly traded companies. It was pretty exciting when Cracker Barrel named their female CEO, and Sandra Cochran, I think is her name. So we have a ways to go.
But to that point, though, Cracker Barrel's naming of a female CEO is only the second of those in the state of Tennessee. I think Regal Cinemas has a female CEO. So of those 60-some-odd companies, only 2 have a female CEO. I don't know the number of CFOs right off the top of my head who are female, but I think your point is well taken that the path to the boardroom is through the C-suite, and until there's gender diversity and racial diversity too in the C-suite, there probably won't be as much diversity in the boardroom as there might be otherwise.
Correct. And saying that too, I should also mention that there are a couple of shining stars in Tennessee that are very diligent about doing just what you talked about, getting a very diverse candidate list, vetting candidates based on their qualifications and the needs that they have on the board, and really focusing on diversity of thought that sometimes translates into gender diversity also.
Well, you and I both attended an event at the New York Stock Exchange this summer. We were both honored to be asked to be guests at the Moving the Needle dinner, which occurred at the New York Stock Exchange in July, and it was sponsored by Corporate Board Member Magazine, which is now owned by the New York Stock Exchange, but is actually based here in Nashville. And our mutual friend T.K. Kerstetter was not only the guiding light behind that dinner, but was the host of the evening. And I was very interested and I guess encouraged that at that event, which was intended to be a networking event with potential female and racial diversity candidates, there was an enormous number of people there who were qualified to assume board seats, who were willing to assume board seats, and TK and his group put all those names together in a listing, which is available, I guess, to anyone who asks for it. So if there happen to be people watching this who are on boards or CEOs who are looking for candidates for board, that roster of potential candidates would be very useful, I would think.
Absolutely.
And I was very impressed at the significant number of people who attended that dinner. I think there were maybe 250 or 300 people there that evening.
There were. They had at least that many for the dinner, and then I was able to attend the networking event the next morning. And were you there?
No, I was not able to stay, but I know the networking event took place.
It was very, very well done. Very, very well done. And just, it was over too fast, is basically what happened. But what it did, as you mentioned, is it gave a lot of people the ability to start to network a little bit more. I heard from our Michigan organization, Inforum, that they're very close to placing a woman on a board due to the Moving the Needle event.
Really?
So we have at least that anecdotal evidence, and I have not checked back with TK to see if he's been able to track that or not. So.
Let me move to the banking industry for just a minute before we run out of time. This is a fascinating discussion, but you had a stellar career in banking. You were a senior officer actually in more than one functional area. You served as the treasurer of First Horizon. You ran the human resources function. You reported directly to the board in several different areas. I wonder if you could comment on your thoughts about the state of play in the banking industry today. We've heard a lot about too big to fail banks. Was First Horizon, was First Tennessee one of those banks?
Not really a too big to fail bank, but because of the complexity of the organization, the large capital markets area, and at one point a big mortgage company, we were very heavily regulated and highly regulated. The state of the banking industry today, I think the biggest challenge right now is that there are so many regulations coming down and so many changes and so much oversight that it's almost difficult for the banks to figure out how to do business because there is a rule about just about everything. I'm particularly concerned about the community banks because what's happening is sort of a trickle down of expectations from the regulators that if the big banks can get themselves into trouble, the community banks are going to go the same way. And so they have such a heavy burden of compliance that they almost can't make money because they have to spend so much money on things that don't matter to them. And I think if the regulatory community and Congress, for that matter, with the laws, could understand the difference between the too big to fails and the community banks, who are really the ones that are driving the economy right now, that would be a really good thing to have happen. I work with community banks a lot, and they know their customers, they know their markets, they're willing to lend money, but if the rules are such that they just can't do it and they have to play by the rules that the big guys do, it's going to be very difficult for them to do that. And they understand that they're not too big to fail.
Sure.
And that's not a good way to have to do business either.
We recently had Bill Nye, who's the CEO of the Bank of Nashville, as a guest in the very seat you're occupying today. And I was surprised to learn that there are 11,000 financial institutions in the United States. I didn't realize there were so many. There are only about 6,000 hospitals, and the nation supports about 4,000 institutions of higher education. So there are way more banks than there are either hospitals or colleges. I wonder, are there too many banks?
Well, the 11,000 is actually down from 14,000 not that many years ago. And yes, I think to some extent there may be too many banks, but I also am a huge supporter of the community bank model. So I think there's a place for banks to start and learn how to do their community and then maybe combine together with each other. One of the things that I have observed over the years that the big banks don't get right, or very rarely get right, is the ability to act like a community bank even though they're a very large corporation. First Tennessee has been able to do that in the past. I don't know whether they're still able to do that with all the things that have been going on. But when I was in the banking organization, I was actually president of one of the banks, the people in that community knew exactly who their customers were and exactly what to do. So I don't want to lose that hometown, face-to-face. I mean, banking is a people business, let's face it. I wouldn't want that to be lost because you had to have consolidation. But on the other hand, I think there's definitely room for banks to come together and still serve their communities.
There's been a lot of talk, Sarah, since the latter part of 2008 when the crash occurred about the fact that perhaps Glass-Steagall should not have been revoked. Glass-Steagall is what kept banks out of other businesses
Right.
like investment banking. Do you think that was a mistake in retrospect?
You know, it's easy to Monday morning quarterback that kind of thing. I think the biggest problem that we had is there was this exuberance in the banking industry that we kind of forgot about our roots, it seems like, and said, well, it'll be okay. We can create all of these alphabet soup of securities that nobody even knows where the collateral is, and it'll be okay. And so what happened is the industry itself sort of allowed itself to get into that almost drug of saying we can make all this money, we can do all of these things, and nothing's ever going to happen. But the banks that came through it in really good shape, and there are many of them that did, they stuck to their roots of how do you manage risk, how do you manage interest rate risk, how do you manage credit risk, how do you manage all the other risks, and didn't get caught up in the moment of saying, if that bank across the street thinks it's a good deal, then I do too, and so I'm going to go after it.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know that regulations necessarily make that big a difference, but you know, certainly there is something to be said because, as you know as well as I do, retail commercial banking that really focuses on those customers and businesses, and investment banking are very, very different. They have the same name, but they're very, very different businesses.
And now we live in a global economy, and moving money from one country to the next, from one continent to the next, all around the globe instantaneously is a normal, everyday part of doing business. And so the challenge now is not just consolidation within the United States, but the challenge is increasingly becoming global consolidation. I walk down the streets of New York or Chicago or really any major city, perhaps even Nashville, and an increasing number of names on the front doors of banks are global organizations,
Right.
HBSC and Royal Bank of Scotland, and on and on and on.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a bad thing?
Not necessarily. I think that in a way that increases competition, and more competition is better. You don't want the banks to have any sort of a monopoly is a bad word, not the right word, but having the competition of other banks is a good thing, I think.
I wonder what grade you would give Chairman Ben Bernanke at the Federal Reserve Board if you were his teacher in class and you were grading him. He's flooding the market with a lot of cash. He's keeping interest rates unbelievably low. It's almost now at a point where investors pay lenders for the privilege of borrowing from them. What kind of grade would you give the Fed today?
Not very high. I don't think I'll pick a grade, but I feel like the money is chasing something that isn't there. It didn't work the first time. It didn't work the second time. Why we think it's going to work the third time doesn't make any sense. And really, if you go back in history, that kind of monetary policy, well, I don't know that we've seen anywhere really recently this much flooding the market with new dollars. And the other thing that I think is really hidden away that the Fed is not focused on or has explained away are all the many people who are on fixed income. And all of a sudden the rule of 72 that we all grew up with doesn't have any validity at all anymore. So people are having to protect their capital, to protect their savings, and not able to see it grow, so they don't have any discretionary dollars to spend. So that's holding the economy back. And it's also causing a lot of people, of course, to be out of work, which holds the economy back. I mean, it's all of these things that the keeping interest rates down and expecting banks to lend more money, yet putting all the additional regulations on them, in my opinion, is not the way to stimulate this economy.
Are we about to see another round of high inflation like we saw in the Carter administration?
I don't know. You know, it's so hard to see where all this leads, because I don't think it's precedented.
And of course, we're referring to quantitative easing. I think it's been dubbed
Right.
QE1 and QE2,
Right.
almost like the Queen Elizabeth cruise liner.
Makes it sound better.
But unfortunately, this is a much more serious topic than cruise liners. And
Right.
I think you're right. I mean, none of us really know where this is headed, and I'm not sure the Fed really does, because it's uncharted territory.
And to your point earlier, we had the global economy and financial markets that we work in is pretty unprecedented also.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I went to a really great lecture by Art Laffer a few weeks ago, and he made the point, somebody asked him about Greece, and he said, Greece doesn't matter, we matter. The United States is the economy that matters, and we have to get our act together.
Well, I might have suggested to Dr. Laffer, although he's obviously more qualified than I am, but he might have added China to the countries that matter.
Exactly, exactly. I think he might have, absolutely.
Thanks for being a guest today. Thanks for being on the Lipscomb campus today.
Thank you so much. I've enjoyed it very much.
Well, me too.
Thank
me
you.
too. We're honored to have had Sarah Meyerrose as our guest today on Conversations with the Dean. I hope you'll join us again soon for the next episode of Conversations with the Dean.